I'd like to introduce to you now our speaker for tonight, Gary S.
Just in case I'm bad, I can hang myself. 2 microphones. Is the president coming? I'm Gary, and I am an alcoholic. I was talking to Arthur before the meeting, and we were discussing the speaker for this evening, and I said, well, Arthur, you got no one to blame for yourself because you booked him, and you've heard him speak before. And Arthur said, well, yes, but you know, I really wasn't listening. So, there you go. Now, a couple things before I get started. I'm missing a lot of teeth, so I'm going to whistle occasionally. I'm starting to have some work done on them, but it's going to take some time and money. Second, I got a little story to tell you. I've been on vacation and been camping, and I'd like to tell you how I lost my billfold. And sometimes sobriety is not what it's all cracked up to be. There's still a little insanity there at times. It seems in campsites there's a little building that's indigenous to most campsites. It's called a kaibo. And if those of you don't know what a kaibo is, it's a toilet. And I was in there posting a letter, and when I stood up and raised my pants, I heard a plop. And I says, no, it couldn't be. And I reached where my wallet was supposed to be, and it wasn't there. Now here's the insanity of it. I wanted my wallet back. I got my wallet back, but I don't have it in my hip pocket, I tell you. Had I been drinking, I would have said to hell with it. Beyond this, I have no idea what I'm going to say. I said a little prayer before things got a little hot, and I turned it over. And I just said, you know, let me say something that might help someone tonight. Not that I'll be entertaining or be good. Just that I might help someone. And that's been one of the reasons why I keep coming back, that maybe there's a reason for my sobriety. You know, early in my sobriety, I asked the question, why am I sober? Why was I brought to my knees and allowed to become sober? And the answer was that perhaps that there was a reason for my sobriety. You know, people are allowed to die drunk, but I wasn't allowed that. And the only answer that I can come up with, someplace along the line, somehow, some way, I'm going to be beneficial either in somebody's life or in somebody's sobriety, which will mean life for them. I had an indication of where that might be here this year, in October of last year, I beg your pardon. See, I'm a Boy Scout leader, as Don and Barry know. My troop was getting kind of low in boys, and had been low for several years, and we hadn't been able to recruit, and I thought perhaps it might be me. And come a long time for recruiting time, I had a little talk with my higher power, and I says, hey, if you want me to be a scout leader, you better do something and do it quick, because I'm getting out. If this is what you want me to do, you better do something quick. And it better be a slap in the face so that I'll know that it's from you. And they held a recruiting night. The district holds these every year. I've gone to them religiously every year, walked out with 0 boys. I wasn't going to go this year, but I went due to a friendship with the guy that was putting it on. He'd asked me specially to show up. So I went for him. You know, I walked out of that room with 9 boys signed up and another 3 the next day. So I guess the higher power slapped me in the face, huh? And that's been the story of my sobriety. I can't leave out the higher power without telling my story. But let me digress a little bit. I don't have a drunk-a-log. I'm the type of person that just went into a bar to drink. I didn't go in to chase girls or to shoot pool, to have a good time. I went in there to sit down at the bar, stare into the mirror, and then stare down at my God and my love, that golden elixir called beer. I started and ended on beer, and in between I drank everything else that was under the sun. I've had Sweet Lucy, White Lightning, you name it, I've drank it. If it had alcohol in it, I've drank it. But my love was beer. So if there's any of you in the room that drank beer and think you can't be an alcoholic, think twice. So, you know, not too many things exciting happening in my drinking, but one story I can tell you which kind of points out the insanity. If I ever doubt that restore me to sanity, I think back to this one little story. And if Ernie F. was here, he would verify it because he was involved in it. There was a bar up here, the street commonly called Tiger Town, which was called Joaquin's at the time. And Ernie and myself and a couple other guys had a chess tournament. We owned the end of the bar. That was ours, and we set up the chessboard there, and we had chess tournaments. And quite interesting, when you're about ready to fall off the bar stool, you make some fantastic moves on that chessboard. But this one particular night, a couple of the Spanish boys got into an argument. A fist fight almost broke out, and a couple of the guys jumped in and cooled it, and one of the boys left the building, and I figured, well, that was going to be the end of that. And about 20 minutes later, the door opened, the back door opened, and I turned around and looked, and in walks this guy with a loaded rifle. And he marches up to this guy he had the argument with. And the thought crossed my mind, no one brings a loaded gun into my bar. That's it. So I indignantly get off my bar stool and stagger up to this fellow, and I step in between them, and that rifle just comes right down in my gut. And I start talking to this boy, and I find out he's not only been drinking, but he's been smoking. And he don't speak English. I sobered up real quick. But fortunately, I had enough guys in that bar that watched my back, and they stepped in. But the insanity of that crossed my mind, that was my bar, and no one stepped out of line in my bar. So whenever I get a little too cocky for myself and think that I don't have to be restored to sanity, I think back to that the insane idea, you know, that's the way I acted when I drank. Okay, I was born and raised in Kansas City, Kansas. Oh, so does that ring a bell with somebody? Now, back there, we have neighborhood bars, and they're more or less ethnic bars because the Midwest, the towns are settled. You know, the Hungarians have their little section, the Italians have their little section of town, and you just kind of run through towns, and everyone has a little neighborhood bar. And my favorite bar where I first started to drink was a little German bar, and it was called Pete's Peekaboo. And you had to be, he was off the main drag, so not too many police made the tour there. And you just had to be tall enough to slap your money on the bar, and he would serve you. Now, it started when I was about 16 in high school, weekends. And I would like to tell you that, you know, my first drink, I loved it. I didn't. I had to learn how to drink, especially beer. And when you buy it by the quarts, because you're not sure if you're going to be served when you come back, we would buy 2 or 3 quarts apiece and drive around town and drink it. And it was hard to get drunk when you have to gag it down. And I had to learn how to drink beer fast enough to get drunk, because where I wanted to be from the very beginning was drunk. You know, it wasn't sociable drinking. It was learning how to drink so that you could drink to get drunk. And then from there on up until the time that I got here, I drank to get drunk. My last drunk was 4 years long, continuously. I never sobered up in 4 years. I can't believe it today that I managed that long without going into DTs and convulsions. I know that I shook constantly. Even when I was dead drunk, I still shook. I'm shaking right now, but not on account of that. My nervous system has been impaired due to that, and when I am extremely tired or I wake up suddenly, I shake. That's what one of the things that alcohol has done for me. When I get extremely tired, my hands will start to shake again. There's been several different phases of my drinking. It started, like I said, in Kansas, in high school, and it progressed from there. I made one tour of duty out here at Vandenberg Air Force Base. I was working for General Dynamics. My drinking increased. I just turned 21, and I was on my own, living in Pismo Beach, good drinking town. And I moved into another phase of my drinking, a little bit heavier. And I spent 1.5 years out here, and I went back to Kansas. It was back in Missouri. After I went home, I wangled a job in the middle of Missouri, Sedalia, Missouri, if anybody's familiar with that. It's almost smack dab in the middle of the state. It's a little town, about 25,000. Not much to do there but drink. And my drinking increased again. Got married, and that didn't slow me down any. I married into a family that drank. My wife doesn't drink, but both her mother and father does. One of her brothers has made it to the program. The other brother doesn't drink. But it was kind of funny, jumping around a little bit tonight, but I was 6 months sober, and we went back on vacation back home, and her brother had just stopped drinking on his own. And I asked him, I says, how come you can do this on your own and I have to go to those blasted meetings? And he says, well, I really didn't like the stuff. I just wanted to be where the girls were. Which sounded reasonable to me at the time. You know, I could appreciate that. And he managed to stay dry for 6 months to 1 year. And in the next 7 years, he managed to drink himself into DTs and convulsions. He now has, I think, 2 years of sobriety. But he goes to AA meetings now. In fact, it was back 1.5 years ago, and it was kind of neat to go to an AA meeting with him. And you know, it's a funny thing. They talk about, you know, anger and resentments back there, too. In fact, every meeting that I stopped at was kind of an anger and a resentment meeting. They talked about anger and resentment. I don't know whether they knew that I was coming that night or not. But I managed to hit about 3 meetings across the country, and every blessed one of them was talking about that. It's amazing. Okay, I'm back here in California now. Landed a job at KCOY TV. Now, I've been employed with KCOY for the last 18, going on 19 years. So my heaviest drinking was done with them. My worst of my sobering up was done with them. My last drink was November the 4th, 1974, in case anybody's wondering. I say that to remind me. It may not impress you, but it impresses the daylights out of me. When I got here, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to stay another day. In fact, that's the reason why I got here, because I wasn't going to be able to last another day by myself. And before I stopped drinking, a organization was formed here in town called SPAN, and they started with a detox center. And they came into the TV station to buy some commercial time, and we had to produce the commercials for them. And it used to just make me angry. Two things made me angry. One, these idiots came in and they bought time when they could have got it free. You know, what the heck are these people trying to do? You know, wasting good money when they could have got it free. And two, every time I had to run one of those ads, it just burned me up. Running one for detox, of all places. And that went on for about a year. And then I had to stop drinking. In the meantime, SPAN had started the SMART program. Now, my second DWI was what got me. The first one, I paid my fine, $360. I stuck about 4.5 years between my first one and my second DWI, being very careful. And you know, it was being the good guy that got me tagged both times for my DWIs, because I was transporting somebody else from one bar to another, and I got tagged. And you know, it was the same guy both times. And he didn't appreciate it. Didn't appreciate it that a bit. He thought it was funny. But the second DWI, I was guilty, of course. No denying it. I wasn't as high on the scale the last time as I was the first. The first time the guy kind of shook his head and wondered what, you know, how come you're still standing up? He said, when he locked the meter, you know, to stamp the paper, after he got through stamping that, he pointed down and says, here is drunk, here is where you are. And he looked at me and says, you should be passed out. And I looked at him and I says, I'm just getting started. The night's young. Now, my second one, I wasn't near that high. But you see, my alcoholism had progressed. It didn't take that much to get me to the same place anymore. I was on the downhill pull. Death or insanity was creeping up on me very, very quickly. So I appeared in court for this second DWI. And working at the TV station, and at that time both judges sitting on the bench were coming down regularly to the TV station, and they had seen me there. So this one judge, I can't remember which one I went before first, whether it was Goodman's or Eckhoff, but one of the two, he pulled some shenanigans to get me out of the courtroom. And I couldn't figure out why at the time, because I was willing to plead guilty, take my punishment, and let it be done with that. But he sent me up to probation without making a sentence. And I get up there and talk to the probation officer, and he says, well, why are you in here? And I says, I don't know. The judge sent me up here to talk to you. So he makes a call down to the judge, and the judge tells him what he wants me to do. The judge couldn't come right out in court and say this. The judge was trying to save me. Now, there's a whole bunch of things that happened that everybody couldn't have got together at one time and plotted this out. This had to be divine guidance that was steering people. From the judge who got me out of that courtroom. And his statement was he wanted me to go get a lawyer and come back and ask to be put on this SMART program. I didn't know anything about it, but it sounded good. So I went and I got a lawyer. Now, I got a lawyer that I knew, I drank with, naturally. And I sit down, and he says, well, we'll see what we can do. Well, he made an application to have me put on the SMART program. Now, at that time, the mechanics of this program was that you had an interview with a group of people to decide if they wanted you on their program or not. And then after they decided that they would allow you on the program, you would sit down and sign a contract stating that you would stop drinking and take their little program. And I figured, well, in that case, I don't have to stop drinking until I sign on the dotted line, right? So I didn't. And it was 2 or 3 weeks in there that I had leeway. And I go in to have this interview. Now, I didn't know it at the time. I figured these were a bunch of goody-goody people that hadn't drank in their whole life, that were sitting around passing judgment on people like myself who drank a lot. I'm not an alcoholic, you understand? I got the denial. I denied it up to the bitter end that I was an alcoholic. I admit to being a drunk, but not an alcoholic. So I go in for this interview. There was about 5 or 6 people sitting around this table. They were asking me questions, and this one lady asked me a stupid question. When was my last drink? And I told her, last night at 10:30. I cut it off. Usually it had been till about 4 in the morning. I had closed up a bar and then brought some home and then drank till I passed out. But this was special. I had this interview, so I cut it off at 10:30. And she come unglued. And I couldn't understand why. I hadn't signed on her damn contract saying I was going to stop drinking yet. And I kind of figured I blew it. Then I left that and didn't hear anything from him for a couple of weeks. And a week later passed, and it was getting close to my next court appearance, and I was getting a little worried. I was about ready to call my lawyer. The day I was getting worried and going to call my lawyer, he called me, and he says, what's going on? He says, I just talked to those people, and they're going to refuse you. So I told him what had happened, and he says, well, let me call him back and see what we can do about this. So he talks to him and gives me a call back. Says he wants me to come down to his office. Well, I figured I'm in deep trouble now, just about where my wallet was. And I show up at his office, and he sits down and he talks to me. Now, here's another divine intervention. He makes a few statements. Had he worded any other way, I'd have got pissed off at him and walked out. Wouldn't have listened to a thing that he said. But he told me what I was supposed to do if I wanted this to happen. If I wanted to stay out of jail, because the judge was going to send me down to Santa Barbara to the county jail. But if I didn't want that to happen, now here's what I was supposed to have to do. 1, quit drinking today. 2, go to some AA meetings. 3, write a letter to SMART and tell them what you've done and beg their forgiveness and ask that you get on their program. And he makes a statement. Like I say, had he worded it in any other way, I'd have told him where to go. Because you understand, I'm not an alcoholic yet. Like I said, I drank with him. We'd been in the JCs together, and that was a drinking bunch. But he says, Gary, he says, I can't tell you if you're an alcoholic or not. I don't know. But I drank with you, and I can tell you one thing. You don't drink like other people. Now that I could understand. I knew that. And he got me to thinking, you know. Had he said, I know you're an alcoholic, Gary, and you better do something about your drinking, I'd have told him where to go, and I'd have walked out and got drunk. And I wouldn't be here telling you about it. But he worded it to where I could understand. And I didn't get angry at him. And he told me that I had to stop drinking today. I figured that's fine, I'll do that. But naturally, being an alcoholic, what did I do? I went and bought a six-pack after I left his office. But that I knew was going to be my last six-pack. I knew that. I took that six-pack home. Now, this is like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I nursed 3 of those beers for the entire evening. At 10:30 at night, I shut it off. And I went to bed, leaving those 3 cans of beer in the icebox. Tall cans. I always bought the tall cans. I'd buy soda pop that way today if they had it in the tall cans. They got it in the tall bottles, but not in the tall cans. I left those beers in the icebox. And I got up, went to work, figuring this piece of cake, just not drinking, nothing to it. Feel fine. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I get off, go home. Stood an awful lot of time that evening standing in front of the icebox with my hands in my pockets. Made it without drinking, went to bed, got up the next morning, went to work. Come along about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I come unglued. I wanted to drink, and there was nothing that was going to fix me but a drink, and I knew it. And I go home, and I'm white-knuckling it. And I'm sitting down in the front room, and I hear a voice, Gary! A little louder, Gary! A little louder, hollers at me. That beer's talking to me in the icebox. And I go and I stand in front of the icebox, and the wife can't figure out what I'm doing. But I'm standing there just gazing at that door. Don't dare open it. And my hands in my pockets. Just standing there rocking back and forth. And I spent most of the evening there. The next day, I know that I'm not going to last another day on my own. So I make a phone call to Alcoholics Anonymous. Can't get an answer all afternoon. No answer. Finally, along about 8 o'clock, I get an answer. And here's another divine intervention. The guy that answered the phone had the deepest voice that you ever wanted to hear, and loud. And he says a few things that still amaze me today, why he worded them the way he did. Because he answers the phone, and I says, I want to know where a meeting is and what time. He says, well, you just missed one. It's going on now. But there's one tomorrow night at the hospital. It's at 8 o'clock, and you be there. Now, he didn't ask me if I had a driver's license and could I drive. Was I well enough to drive? Did I need somebody to come over and talk to me tonight? Did I want somebody, would it be nice if somebody came over tomorrow and took me to a meeting? He didn't say that. He just says, you be there. No, I got the shakes. This phone's banging me in the ear. He's got a big booming voice. And I'm convinced I'm talking to God. I'll tell you, I wouldn't have been anyplace else the next day. I toughed it out the next day. Now, in the car on the way down to Marion Hospital, where the meeting was being held on Wednesday nights at that time, the thought crossed my mind that there's no hope for a guy like me. I'm not going to be able to find any answer there. Maybe it's fine for you people, but there's no hope for me. I am going to be doomed to death or insanity, and those the exact same words crossed my mind, and I hadn't had any contact with Alcoholics Anonymous or the Big Book then. But I knew that if I didn't find something in those rooms that night, I was going to be doomed to death or insanity. I didn't know which fear was driving me the worst when I got out of that car and walked up to the front door of Marion Hospital. Whether it was the fear I wasn't going to find my answer in those rooms that night, or whether that gal at the desk was going to know that I was an alcoholic. That crossed my mind too as I walked through the door. Now, a year later of religiously going to those meetings on Wednesday night, they moved the meeting downstairs because the firemen were having a first aid class in the O'Dwyer room that night. And without hesitation, as I walked by the desk, the gal says, "Oh, by the way, the meeting's downstairs tonight." I knew my anonymity was going to be broken. I just knew it from that first night. But anyway, I walked through those doors. I stood outside the doors of that room for a couple minutes, and I could hear the laughter inside. You know, that was new to me. Here were people that were enjoying themselves without drinking. At least I thought they weren't drinking. This was supposed to be an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. So I finally got up enough nerve and I pushed myself through the doors, and God bless him, I think it was Victor McKay, that came up and shook my hand and set me down. He could see that I was hurting and I was shaking, and he set me down and went and brought me a cup of coffee. And I was afraid to pick it up because I couldn't pick anything up without spilling it. I had to pick it up with both hands and sip my coffee, and I didn't dare lift it too far off the table. And the room was set up to where the tables were set in a horseshoe, and they set me in the middle of the horseshoe. And they started calling on people all around me. And I was too embarrassed to look at you people. And I kept staring at this coffee, wishing that I could have a sip of it more than anything else. And I'd have to sneak a peek every now and then. Because you were talking about me. You know, first this guy, and then that guy, and then this woman would talk. And I have to look at you. Have you drank with me? You know me? Did you see me coming and you had this all lined up that you tell me about this thing and you tell me about that thing and you talk about that thing that happened in his life? And that's what you were doing. You were talking about me. And I thought, well, maybe there's hope. That's one of the things I took home from my first meeting was hope. That maybe there's hope for a guy like me that can stop drinking. Bill, they told me that this meeting goes to 8:15. Okay. In case you don't clear your throat on me. I took a couple of other things home in that first meeting. Why, I don't know. But one thing kept ringing in my head that night as I lay in bed. It was read at the beginning of the meeting. Now here's a guy that can't think too clearly. He can't hold a coffee cup without spilling it. He doesn't know for sure what's going on, but I took these things home with me. It's read at the beginning of every meeting. For a long time, I thought it was in big, bold type. But it's not. But it was that big in my mind. And it rang like a bell. If you've decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. That sends a chill up my spine today when I say it. You know? Because I found something in that room. I found that hope. And I wanted a piece of it. I didn't know for how long I could stop drinking, but I wanted a piece of it. Another thing that I took home was that I wasn't going to be able to do this by myself. I wasn't strong enough to stay sober by myself because I was coming unglued. So I said a prayer. I was afraid to say that prayer because I'm not an agnostic and I'm not an atheist. I believe in a higher power and have. But when you drink like I do, there's no room for a God. My God was that golden elixir. I'd shoved him out of my life, and I was afraid of the vengeance of that God that I'd learned as a youth. You know, he's going to loose the angry lightning upon me. But out of sheer desperation, I said a prayer, and I said a very simple one. And I continue saying that prayer today. I'm not strong enough to stay sober by myself. But if you'll give me the energy that I do not possess to stay sober tomorrow, I will give the energy that I do, every ounce of it, to stay sober. And maybe between the two of us, we can stay sober tomorrow. And I thank you for keeping me sober today. Now that has gotten me through many and many a rough spot. That I am willing to give every ounce of energy that I possess not to drink today. But I must have that I don't possess from that higher power. Now I have many, many names for my higher power. I don't always call it God. And if anyone's having trouble calling their higher power God, let me tell you a little story. Around these rooms one night I heard a fellow say that I call my higher power Charlie. And when I want to get formal with him, I call him Charles. I don't remember who it was. But I was telling that to one of the people I was sponsoring at the time. And he says, that sounds neat. Because I could see what his problem was. He believed in a higher power, but he was having trouble gagging past that word God. And I said, well, I told him about the Charlie and the Charles. He says, that sounds neat. So that night, I walked in the meeting, he was here, and he was just all aglow, and he comes up to me and he says, hey, he says, it's working. I says, what's working? He says, I got a name for my higher power, and it's neat. He says, I call him Roger. Now, don't let that go to your head, Roger. But you see, he got past that word God that we all choke on sometimes. Because in our youth, we've had it crammed down our throats, the vengeful God. And what we find in these rooms today is an all-loving and all-caring God. Because if it wasn't, I wouldn't be here today. I have been privileged of seeing many, many miracles happen in these rooms. I've been privileged to be a part of a couple of them. But mostly I enjoy sitting back and watching them happen. You know, one Sunday morning, I was sitting in a meeting and I was sitting back where Erna was. And we'd gone through about half of the room. Of course, at the beginning of the meeting was asked, has anybody got anything that they're having a problem with that they would like to have talked about? No one said anything, as usual. But we made it through about half of the room, and I had already spoken. And it gets up here at the head of the table, and this one gentleman spoke up and had a big problem. Was that close to taking a drink. And I nudged the fellow next to me and I says, listen up. You're going to see a miracle happen. And he looked at me kind of cross-eyed and says, what do you mean? I says, higher power is going to allow someone to say something to this person that's going to help them. I says, I don't know who it's going to be and I don't know when it's going to happen, but you just keep listening because you're going to see it if you keep your eyes and your ears open. And went through about 4 other people. The first 2 words out of this lady's mouth, I nudged him and I says, there it is. I could hear the urgency. Sometimes, someday when you're talking in a meeting and you're talking so fast you can't get the words out of your mouth fast enough, maybe it's your higher power shoving those words out. Yeah. I says, there it is. You could almost see the electricity going between these two people. If you stick around long enough and don't drink, you're going to be seeing more and more and more of those things happen if you keep your eyes and your ears open. Funny thing happened to me one night, going to another meeting. On the way from the house down to the meeting, something struck me on the radio. I don't even remember today what it was, but it was important at the time to me. I says, gee, that would make a neat topic for a discussion tonight. Now, if I am chosen to be the leader, I'll use that. And I walked through the door, and they says, would you like to be the leader? I says, great, I got a topic. He says, well, that's fantastic. Usually we don't have a topic. So I went through the readings and all of that, and just out of courtesy, I asked if anyone had a topic for discussion tonight. And one fellow sitting over to the right side of me says, yes, I do. And I thought to myself, well, okay, it's a good enough topic. I'll save it for another meeting. No big problem. Lo and behold, his topic was my topic. And we started talking, calling on about 3 people, and I could see that they were at least missing what I thought this fellow wanted to have talked about. So I stopped and I went into a speech of what I thought, and the guy's name just happened to be John, what John wanted to have talked about. And I don't know how long that I talked because I went into a blackout. But when I came out of the blackout, I looked around, and the first thing that struck me was the tone of my voice. It scared me. It was so calm and peaceful, and at that time I wasn't calm and peaceful because I was an angry, angry person when I came in here, and everybody's sitting on the edge of their seat, hanging on it. I assumed every word that I said. And I turned to John, and John's jaw has dropped about yay far, and I said, John, isn't that what you want to have talked about? Uh-huh. Now, I have no idea what I said. I can only assume that my higher power put words in my mouth to say. Now, I've had 2 or 3 other experiences like that, but I won't bore you. My higher power is maybe different from yours. If yours is working for you, I allow you to have yours. If it's not, perhaps you'd like to listen to what someone else's higher power is. But mine works for me. Like I say, I don't always call it God. But one thing that I do is I try to make a conscious contact with a higher power. And I try to pray for other people instead of myself. Because I find that by praying for what you need, I am given everything that I pray for you. So it works in reverse. It takes me out of me because I'm worrying about you and not worrying about me. And the perfect prayer is one that you start and you fall asleep in the middle of before you finish. Because your higher power knows what you're going to say and says, okay, it's all right, you don't have to finish it, get some rest, go to sleep. That's the perfect prayer. And with that, I'm going to close. Thank you very much.